The dollar felt heavier than gold in Thomas Hartwell's palm, and the woman's trembling hands made it shake like a leaf in winter wind. Dust devils spiraled around the ramshackle auction platform where desperate men bid on human misery. The Kansas heat pressing down like a smithy's anvil. The burlap sack over her head moved with each ragged breath, and something about the way she held her shoulders, straight despite everything, made his chest tighten with a memory he couldn't place. "Last call for this fine specimen," barked Silas Crane, the self-proclaimed marriage broker, whose oiled mustache couldn't hide the cruelty in his eyes. $1 takes her home, no questions asked. Thomas stepped forward, his boots crunching on the hard-pan dirt. The other bidders, drifters and degenerates mostly, fell silent as they recognized the grieving widower from the Hartwell ranch. 6 months since consumption took his Mary. 6 months of rattling around that empty house like a ghost himself. "I'll take her," he said, his voice carrying across the makeshift camp. Crane's grin revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "Smart man. Cash only." The woman's head turned toward Thomas's voice, a slight movement that sent another chill through him. He pressed the silver dollar into Crane's palm and wondered what desperation had driven him to this godforsaken place outside Dodge City, where human flesh traded cheaper than cattle. "She's all yours," Crane said, shoving a crumpled paper at him. "Bill of sale, legal as Sunday church. Don't matter what she was before, she's your property now." Thomas took the woman's elbow gently, feeling her flinch at his touch. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's get you out of here." The ride back to his ranch stretched 15 miles through rolling prairie grass that whispered secrets to the evening wind. She sat rigid beside him on the wagon seat, the burlap sack still covering her head, her hands folded in her lap like a prayer. Thomas had offered to remove it twice, but she'd shaken her head both times. "Name's Thomas," he said as they crested a hill overlooking his spread. "Thomas Hartwell. That's my place down there." The ranch looked smaller than usual in the dying light. A 2-room cabin, a barn that needed new shingles, corrals holding maybe 30 head of longhorn cattle bearing his TH brand. Not much to show for 15 years of hard living, but it was honest work. "You got a name?" he asked. Her head moved slightly, but no words came. The wagon wheels found every rut and stone on the path down to the cabin. Thomas's collie, Rex, came bounding out to greet them, tail wagging, but stopped short when he caught the woman's scent. The dog's head tilted, ears perked forward in confusion. "Easy, boy," Thomas said. But Rex circled the wagon twice before settling into an uneasy sit. Inside the cabin, kerosene lamplight threw dancing shadows on walls that still held Mary's touch. Her grandmother's quilt draped over the rocking chair, her collection of china animals lined up on the mantel. The woman stood just inside the doorway, head still covered, as if waiting for permission to exist. "You can take that off now," Thomas said gently. "You're safe here." Her hands moved to the rough fabric, paused, then slowly lifted the sack away. Thomas's heart stopped. The face that emerged was older than he remembered, marked by hardship and grief, but unmistakable. Sarah Hartwell, his brother Jacob's wife, who disappeared 3 years ago when Comanche raiders hit their homestead 60 miles south. The woman everyone said was dead, including Jacob himself. "Sweet Jesus," Thomas whispered. Sarah's green eyes met his, filled with shame and something deeper, a plea for understanding that cut him to the bone. Her auburn hair, once lustrous as autumn leaves, hung in dull tangles around a face that had learned too much about surviving. "Hello, Thomas," she said, her voice like wind through broken glass. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and impossible answers. Thomas sank into Mary's rocking chair, his mind reeling. Jacob had searched for weeks after the raid, found their cabin burned and Sarah's torn dress by the creek. He'd buried an empty coffin and grieved himself into a bottle that still hadn't let him go. "How?" Thomas asked. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "They kept me. 3 years." Her voice barely carried across the room. Made me forget who I was. When I finally got away, got to Dodge, I had nothing. No money, no family that would claim a woman who'd been... She couldn't finish. "Jacob thinks you're dead. Better that way." Sarah moved to the window, staring out at the darkening prairie. "What I am now, what they made me." He couldn't bear it. Thomas studied her profile in the lamplight, seeing past the surface damage to the woman who'd once laughed at Jacob's terrible jokes and baked pies that could make a preacher weep. "You're still Sarah? Still his wife?" She turned on him then, eyes flashing. "Am I? After 3 years of being nothing but property? After what I had to do just to stay alive?" Her voice cracked. "I ended up at that auction because it was the only way left. At least this way I chose." The word "chose" hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Thomas understood now why she'd seemed familiar, even with the sack over her head. Family recognized family, even in the darkest places. "Jacob's been drinking himself to death," he said quietly. "Blames himself for not being there. Good. Maybe he'll forget easier that way. That's not living, Sarah. That's just dying slow." She laughed, but it held no humor. "And what would you call this?" Thomas stood, moved to the kitchen pump, and filled a basin with water. He set it on the table with a bar of Mary's lavender soap and a clean towel. I'd call it a chance to start over. Sarah stared at the simple offering, as if it were made of gold. When had anyone last shown her such basic kindness? "Why?" she whispered. "Because you're family. Because Jacob would want me to. Because..." He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound empty. "Because everybody deserves a second chance to be who they really are." That night, Thomas gave Sarah the bedroom while he made his bed on the kitchen floor. Through the thin walls, he heard her crying. Deep, silent sobs that seemed to echo from somewhere far deeper than grief. He lay awake listening to the night sounds of his land. Cattle lowing in the distance, wind rattling the shutters, the soft hoot of a barn owl hunting mice in the corral. Come morning, he found her at the stove, cooking eggs and bacon with practiced efficiency. She'd washed her hair and braided it back, and though her dress was still the rough sacking Crane had provided, she looked more like the Sarah he remembered. "Sleep any?" he asked. "Some." She didn't meet his eyes. "Thomas, about Jacob. We'll figure it out. But first, you need to remember who you are. Not what happened to you. Who you are." She set a plate before him, eggs over easy just like Mary used to make them. "And if I can't, then we'll build somebody new from scratch." The words surprised them both. Thomas hadn't planned to make such an offer. But something about Sarah's quiet courage reminded him that healing took time and patience. Qualities the frontier didn't often allow, but that broken people needed most. Over the following weeks, they fell into an unlikely routine. Sarah helped with the house and garden, while Thomas worked the cattle. She never spoke of her captivity, and he never pushed. Instead, They built trust through small gestures, shared meals, mended fences, quiet evenings reading by lamplight from Mary's collection of books. Rex had accepted Sarah after that first confused night, though the dog still watched her with protective concern, as if sensing the shadows that followed her. Sometimes Thomas caught Sarah staring toward the southern horizon where Jacob's spread lay, her face a map of longing and fear. "You could write to him," Thomas suggested one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun die behind distant hills. Sarah shook her head. "What would I say?" "Hello, husband. I'm not dead, but I wish I was. Sorry I survived when you thought I didn't." "You could say you love him." "Do I?" The question came out sharper than she intended. After 3 years of being someone else's property, after learning things about myself I never wanted to know, do I even remember what love feels like? Thomas rocked slowly in Mary's old chair, the wood creaking like settling bones. Love isn't something you remember. It's something you choose every day, especially when it's hard. Easy words from a man whose wife died in his arms instead of disappearing into hell. The barb found its mark, but Thomas didn't flinch. "Mary's gone, and I can't change that. But Jacob's still alive, still hurting, still yours if you want him. And if he doesn't want me, if he can't stand to look at what I've become, then you'll know where you stand. But not knowing is its own kind of death." That night, Thomas woke to the sound of Sarah pacing the kitchen floor. Through his window, he could see her silhouette moving back and forth like a caged animal. When morning came, she seemed to have reached some internal resolution. "I want to see him," she said over breakfast. "But not like this. Not as some broken thing you bought at auction." Thomas studied her face, seeing steel beneath the uncertainty. "What do you need?" "Time. And maybe I need to remember how to be Sarah Hartwell again, not just someone who survived." The answer came from an unexpected source. That afternoon, a rider approached carrying news from town. Jacob had taken sick with pneumonia and was asking for Thomas. The message carried an unspoken urgency that made both of them understand. Time was running short. Sarah stood by the window, watching the dust settle from the messenger's departure. "He's dying. Maybe. Or maybe he's just tired of living without you." She turned from the window, and Thomas saw something new in her eyes. Not hope exactly, but something harder and more valuable. Determination. "I'm going with you," she said. "Sarah, I'm going. Whatever happens, I won't let him die thinking I chose to leave him." They rode south through country Thomas knew by heart, rolling grassland broken by creek beds and stands of cottonwood where cattle gathered for shade. Sarah sat her horse well despite 3 years away from the saddle, and Thomas found himself remembering the woman she'd been. Quick to laugh, quicker to defend those she loved, with hands gentle enough to doctor sick calves and strong enough to help brand yearling. Jacob's ranch looked like grief made manifest. Peeling paint, broken fences, cattle scattered and thin. The house that had once rung with laughter sat silent as a tomb, its windows dark even in midday sun. "Jesus," Thomas breathed. "What's he done to himself?" They found Jacob in bed, burning with fever, his face gaunt and gray. Doc Henderson from town looked up as they entered, shaking his head. "Pneumonia, but that's not what's killing him," the doctor said quietly. "Man's just given up. I've seen it before. Body follows the spirit into the ground." Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, staring at her husband's wasted form. Jacob's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and labored. On the nightstand sat a daguerreotype of their wedding day, young faces bright with promise and love. "Jacob," Thomas said softly. His brother's eyes fluttered open, struggled to focus. "Tommy, that you?" "Yeah, Jacob, it's me." "Good. Wanted to tell you something. About Sarah." Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. "Found something. In the ruins. After all this time." He gestured weakly toward a wooden box on the dresser. Thomas retrieved it, opened it to find a tarnished silver locket, Sarah's wedding gift from her mother. "Comanche trader brought it through town last month." Jacob wheezed. "Said he got it from a woman, white woman who escaped their camp, headed north. Said she told him—" Jacob's eyes drifted shut, then opened again with effort. "Said she told him to return it to the Hartwell Ranch, that her husband would know what it meant." Sarah stepped forward into the lamplight, and Jacob's fevered gaze found her face. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Jacob's cracked lips formed her name. "Sarah?" "I'm here, Jacob. I'm here." He reached toward her with a trembling hand, and she took it in both of hers. "You're real? Not another fever dream?" "I'm real." Tears streamed down her face. "I'm so sorry, Jacob. Sorry I couldn't get back sooner. Sorry for what I became, what I had to do to survive." "Don't." Jacob's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Don't you apologize for living. Don't you dare." Thomas stepped back, giving them space, but he could see the moment when healing began. Not complete, not perfect, but real. Sarah leaned down to kiss her husband's forehead, and Jacob closed his eyes as if storing the sensation against future darkness. "The things that happened," Sarah whispered. "The things I had to do brought you home to me. That's all that matters." Doc Henderson cleared his throat. "I'll leave some medicine. Keep him warm, get fluids in him. The fever should break in a day or two if—" He left the condition unspoken, but Thomas heard it anyway. If Jacob chose to fight. Over the next 3 days, Sarah never left Jacob's side. She spooned broth into him, bathed his fever-broken skin, told him stories of home while he drifted in and out of consciousness. Thomas handled the ranch work, mending fences and gathering scattered cattle. But he could hear Sarah's voice through the cabin walls. Patient, loving, determined. On the 3rd night, Jacob's fever broke. Thomas woke to find them sitting together on the porch, Sarah's head on Jacob's shoulder, both watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky. Jacob looked thin as winter grass, but his eyes were clear. "Thank you," Jacob said as Thomas joined them, "for bringing her home." "She brought herself. I just provided transportation." Sarah lifted her head to look at both brothers. "There's something else. Something I need you both to know." She took a shaky breath. "I'm carrying a child." The words fell like stones into still water, rippling outward in silence. Thomas felt his heart clench. For Sarah, for Jacob, for the impossible complexity of survival and love. Jacob's hand found Sarah's face, touched her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Whose? I don't know. Could be yours from before. Could be." She couldn't finish, but Jacob nodded understanding. "Doesn't matter," he said quietly. "You're home. That's what matters." But Thomas could see the struggle in his brother's eyes. Love warring with hurt, hope fighting against the practical realities of frontier life, where bloodlines and legitimacy meant everything. "Jacob," Thomas said carefully, "whatever you decide, you'll have family standing with you." The baby was born 6 months later. A daughter with Sarah's green eyes and dark hair that could have come from either bloodline, Jacob named her Hope, and when the church ladies whispered about timing and propriety, he faced them down with the quiet dignity of a man who'd learned what mattered most. Thomas stood as godfather at the christening, holding the squirming infant while the preacher spoke words about redemption and new beginnings. Outside the church, the three of them lingered in the spring sunshine, reluctant to end the moment. "I've been thinking," Jacob said, "about that $1 you paid for my wife." Thomas shook his head. "Already forgotten?" "No, it wasn't forgotten. It was the best investment the Hartwell family ever made." Jacob reached into his pocket, pulled out a silver $1, and pressed it into Thomas's palm. "For luck. For remembering that sometimes the most valuable things come in packages we don't expect." Sarah shifted baby Hope to her other arm, then reached up to kiss Thomas's cheek. "For bringing me home to myself," she whispered. The years that followed weren't easy. No frontier life ever was. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle stolen by rustlers, crops lost to hail. But the Hartwell brothers worked their adjoining spreads as partners, their families bound by trials that might have broken weaker bonds. Hope grew into a spirited child, who called both men Uncle Thomas and Papa Jacob without distinction. When she was old enough to ask difficult questions, Sarah answered them with honesty tempered by love. The past hadn't been erased, but it had been transformed into something that strengthened rather than destroyed. Thomas never married again, though he had offers. Instead, he became the confirmed bachelor uncle who spoiled Hope with carved toys and riding lessons, who sat by the fire on winter evenings, telling stories that made the child's eyes grow wide with wonder. On Hope's 5th birthday, Sarah found Thomas repairing a broken gate between the two properties. She watched him work in comfortable silence before speaking. "Do you ever regret it? Buying me that day?" Thomas straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Do you regret surviving?" "Sometimes, but not today." "Then we're even." Sarah smiled, the first completely unguarded smile Thomas had seen from her since that day at the auction. "Jacob's talking about expanding the herd, running cattle together under both brands." "Good idea. Better profits, shared risk. Shared everything." Sarah's voice carried deeper meaning. "Families should stick together." Thomas nodded, returning to his work on the gate. As the sun settled toward the horizon, painting the grassland in shades of gold and amber, he could hear Hope's laughter from the direction of Jacob's house, could smell the wood smoke from Sarah's kitchen where she was preparing supper for her small family. The gate swing smooth and true on its new hinges, a small repair that would last for years, connecting one piece of Hartwell land to another, ensuring that neither man would face the future alone. That night, as was his custom, Thomas sat on his porch reading by lamplight. The book was one of Mary's favorites, a collection of poems about love and loss and the eternal hope that tomorrow might bring redemption. From across the pasture, he could see the warm glow of windows in Jacob's house, could imagine the evening rituals of a family settling into peaceful routine. Rex raised his head at the sound of approaching hoofbeats, but relaxed as Jacob rode into the yard. Thomas's brother looked years younger than the fever-broken man of 5 years past, his face weathered but peaceful. "Sarah sent pie," Jacob said, dismounting with a wrapped bundle. "Apple, the way Mary used to make it." "She didn't have to do that." "Yes, she did. We both know you can't cook worth a damn." Jacob settled into the other porch chair, and for a while they sat in comfortable silence, sharing the pie and watching the stars emerge in the vast prairie sky. Thomas, Jacob said eventually, that dollar you paid for Sarah. I want you to know something. Jacob, we don't need to. Yes, we do. Jacob's voice carried the weight of years and healing. You didn't just buy her freedom that day. You bought all of us a second chance. Me, Sarah, Hope, even yourself. Don't think I don't see how much lighter you've gotten, having family close again. Thomas considered this, tasting truth in his brother's words. Guess we all needed saving, one way or another. Guess we did. Above them, the Milky Way stretched across the darkness like scattered grain, and somewhere in Jacob's house, a child slept safely in her parents' love. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying scents of home and growing things, of cattle and horses, and the simple contentments of people who had learned to value what truly mattered. Thomas reached into his pocket, felt the silver dollar Jacob had given him years before. Some investments, he reflected, paid dividends that couldn't be counted in mere money. They paid in restored lives, in children's laughter, in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when darkness fell, it didn't fall alone. The past couldn't be changed, but it could be redeemed. Love wasn't always pretty or perfect, but it endured. And sometimes, if a man was very lucky and very brave, he might find that the things he thought were lost forever had simply been waiting for the right moment to come home. Don't forget to subscribe and consider giving a like to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.